This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Jeff Whitworth, K-State crop entomologist, kicks off the show, reminding alfalfa growers of what insects they could be seeing and if they should spray. K-State cow-calf extension specialist Jason Warner and K-State agricultural economist Dustin Pendell continue today's show as they converse about what cattle producers should track and manage if they are hoping to minimize costs. Ending today's show is K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent Jason Graves discussing the importance of soil health for adding heat-loving perennials to the home landscape. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking about alfalfa insects with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. Anytime.
Jeff, we've talked about alfalfa weevils a few times. However, maybe hearing some more questions from alfalfa growers, and what are you wanting to remind them about?
Yes, we talk about alfalfa weevils every year. Incessantly, it seems to me like, until that first cutting. Sometimes, like this year, it even stretches over until after the first cutting, and the plants are trying to regrow a little bit. And that's what I'd like to mention just a little bit today. The alfalfa season is moving along pretty well. We've had pretty good results, I think, compared to the last 2 or 3 years, primarily because of the weather, but it seems like the guys have gotten on spraying alfalfa weevils pretty well, at least this year. I got to preface that by saying it's a year-by-year thing because of the timing. Timing's all essential when we treat any pest, period. And with alfalfa, especially, it's a problem because of the time of year when the alfalfa weevils come around. It's cold, rainy, sleet, snow, windy, and even though you know when you need to treat them, you can't always do that. So that often results into quite a few adults left in the field, even though the sprays did a pretty good job of killing maybe 90-95% of the larvae, which is the main feeding stage of the alfalfa weevil. But right now, and in the last week or so, a lot of the fields, at least in the north central part of the state, have been swathed. But underneath those windrows, there's a considerable amount of alfalfa weevil pupae and a few adults, and that's good because what that means is the larval stage, the voraciously feeding stage, is primarily done with, and the larvae have pupated and or are coming out as adults. I say that's good if it's cool and cloudy, and by cool I mean 80 degrees or less. The adults may hang around in the field. Otherwise, they leave these fields. They will hang around under the windrows. One of the questions I get is, should I spray under that windrow to kill those remaining insects that are underneath there? We do not recommend that. Once you pick up the windrow, there will be evidence of some feeding of alfalfa weevils and some other insects, but that will go away and the alfalfa will recover, and you will never know those stripes are in that field. So do not spray under the windrows. I mean, that's our recommendation. Also, I always get the question, should I spray for adults? We do not recommend treating for adults usually. Yes, they will hang around and they will do a little feeding called barking on the stems. They may hold back the regrowth a little bit, but nothing like the larvae. As soon as the temperatures get up to 70, 75 degrees, the adults will leave the field and they won't come back. And they're a little more difficult to kill anyway, and they're really difficult to determine if you did kill them because they're so mobile. So once they get to spraying them, they fly away and die, and you can't tell. So our recommendation is, yes, the adults are going to be there. If it's going to be cool the rest of this week and next week, they may hang out, but they're not going to do enough damage to justify treating. So try and refrain from treating for adults. They should go away in the next week or two, and your field should be fine.
Could growers also potentially be seeing alfalfa aphids in their fields?
Yes, and that brings up the aphids. We're between alfalfa weevils and potato leaf hoppers right now. Potato leaf hoppers usually come in towards right around the second cutting. I mean, just for a generalization, I have not found any yet in the north central part of the state in alfalfa, but we are seeing some aphids. So the aphids are going to be feeding on the plants. They suck the juice out of the plant. They're really pretty easily seen right now when you walk out and you've just cut your field and you see all these aphids clustered around the little stems, around the end of the stems, sucking the juice out of it. Everybody gets a little bit nervous. What we have found, and it's true again this year, there's a considerable population of lady beetles. And the lady beetles right now that I've seen are small larvae, so they're really hard to detect, but they're there. And these larvae are voracious at feeding on aphids. So the pea aphids that are out there or any other aphids, the larvae that I've seen of the lady beetle or the lady beetle adult, I think they're going to be taken care of. So we don't recommend treating for aphids because that helps feed the lady beetles so the lady beetle population can build up for other aphids that may come in on sorghum or corn or anything else later in the year. So right now, if you can refrain from spraying the adult weevils and the pea aphids or the aphids that are in your field, I think I'd really recommend that.
What do those aphids look like?
The aphids are really small. They're just green. In all the fields I've checked this week, they're the only aphids that are out there. The pea aphid it's in the book, Crop Insects of Kansas, good pictures, descriptions of it. You can't confuse it with anything else. Plus, it's the only aphid that's in the alfalfa right now feeding. Later on, we may have a couple more species of aphids, but they all do primarily the same thing. The pea aphid is the cool weather aphid. That's why they're only there now. As soon as it warms up, those aphids will not develop well, and so you're not going to have a problem with pea aphids or alfalfa weevils.
So when we're thinking about alfalfa weevils and pea aphids, general message, leave the sprayer in the shed?
That's a great message right now for spraying alfalfa right after it's been cut until you start seeing something else come in that's really setting back the alfalfa, like potato leafhoppers. I think that's one of the insect pests that we don't look at enough or we don't sample for or we don't monitor enough that can cause problems by sucking the juice out of the plant and transmitting a toxin. But for right now, I think around the north central part of the state, we're looking at a good population of beneficials. The lady beetles, the lady beetle larvae, that's what we like to see, a whole bunch of small and medium-sized lady beetle larvae coming on, and a few aphids to feed them. They have to have food. And the adult alfalfa weevils are still in the pupal case, so they'll be exiting the fields soon, going to wherever they go to over summer, and we won't have any problems with them till next September, October, November, sometime in the fall anyway.
You've mentioned potato leafhoppers. When do those usually show up?
Potato leafhoppers don't overwinter in Kansas. At least they never have. They go to the southern part of the United States or even further south than that. It doesn't matter. They come back into the state every year, usually between the second and the third cutting. It's probably the first to the mid part of June. So when we first start seeing our first potato leafhoppers, they come in on the winds. You get some southern breezes, blows potato leafhoppers in. All of a sudden, they're all there. The females start laying eggs, inserting the eggs inside the stems of the alfalfa, and those little tiny hoppers come out in 3 or 4 days. And like the larval alfalfa weevil, like the nymph aphids, are like teenagers. They feed 24/7, it seems like, and that's when we have problems. Potato leafhopper infestation will probably start again, like I said, in 2 to 3 weeks, but I've not seen any now. One of the other things I should probably mention is miller moths. When we talk about army cutworms feeding in the wheat and feeding in the alfalfa, the army cutworm is now pupating from what I've seen in the last week, and it happens every year right around Memorial Weekend, give or take 6 or 7 days. But the miller moth, that's just the adult moth of the army cutworm, and they'll come out and they will cause problems from probably 75 highway, which runs north and south through the state, around Topeka west, especially in the south central and north central part of the state. It seems like they aggregate, whatever you want to call them, they all bunch up. They're attracted to lights at night, and they're very quick, they're very fast. They carry no diseases, but they're a nuisance. So especially around Wichita, Newton, Salina, those areas, I get a lot of calls about miller moths. What can I do about them? There's not much you can do about them. They're just gearing up to head to Colorado, to the mountains, where they will over summer. So the only thing I can tell you is keep your doors shut at night, keep the lights off so the moth's not attracted at night. Roll up the windows in your cars because that's a favorite place for them to get. They're just a nuisance. All they're doing is hanging out, getting a little energy. They don't feed. They just get a little energy and then all head west to the Colorado Mountains for the summer.
Jeff, what does that potato leafhopper look like?
Potato leafhopper, oh man, those are herky-jerky little wedge-shaped lime green insects. You can see them without magnification. It has a little white spot at the front of the nymph or the adult. The adults have wings. As you walk into the field, you'll see these little lime green insects jump on your boots or your shoe. And they, like I said, I don't know how else to describe it. They have a herky-jerky motion. They'll fly maybe 2 or 3 foot, and they'll go back down into the canopy, or they'll go back down into the vegetation. The nymphs can't fly, so as you walk through there, they will jump on your boot, but they're very shy, so they won't stay on top. They don't stay on top of the vegetation. They go underneath on the underside of the leaf, and when you walk through there and they fall on your boot, they're the ones that are very quick, herky-jerky motion. If they're green and really small, about the same size, and they don't move fast, that's an aphid. The aphids are green, but they just crawl real slow, move from one place to another. The aphid populations can explode because, as we talked about before, they reproduce without the benefit of a male. What that means is they're all females, so they don't have to look for a mate. They don't have to wait for eggs to develop. They just all produce females, and those females produce females. So 2 weeks to 3 weeks after they're here, all those aphids can produce more. The potato leafhopper can produce almost that quickly as far as nymphs go, but they have to lay eggs inside the stems of the plants.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about minimizing expenses for cattle producers with K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner and K-State Agricultural Economist Dustin Pendell. Dustin, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
When we're thinking about minimizing expenses, what's the first step producers need to do?
So I think for me, as I really look at it, the big thing that we really want to focus on first is just getting a good, accurate handle on what those costs are. And anytime we have a discussion centered around production costs and for the purposes of this conversation, specific to the cow-calf enterprise of the industry, just making sure that we do a really good, thorough job of analyzing and understanding what those costs are. And that's going to look a little bit different, certainly, for every operation. But just taking the time and finding the time throughout the year to really study and know what those costs are, I think is really important. When you look at where calf prices and cold cow prices are, certainly being able to know what our cost structure is to be able to understand the level of true profitability that we're seeing in the industry right now, that's certainly really, really important. The other thing, too, that I think we have to keep in mind is that at least with the cow-calf industry, not all producers that raise beef cows and produce calves at weaning are necessarily profit driven or profit motivated. That depends certainly on the size of the operation that we're working with, but just having a good basic understanding of what those costs are, especially for those operations as we scale up in size, is certainly important.
Yeah, I guess just to add to that was the first thing that came to mind. And what's the saying? You can't manage what you don't know, or something along those lines. And if you don't know what your costs are, how can you reduce them or manage those? And so it's record keeping for me is what comes back to. And I think there's some good resources available for producers of all sizes. Various land-grant universities have lots of detailed spreadsheets or there's software out there for sure that will help in managing those, helping you with those record keeping.
And as we're thinking about record keeping, is setting a budget, if you know what your expenses are from previous years, trying to set a budget for the coming year important?
Absolutely. For a few reasons. One, especially if you need to get an operating loan, I guess, an operating note. If you're going into your banker, your lender, saying and you need to take out that note, you've got to probably have some kind of document saying, hey, here's what my past expenses are. Here's what my projections are for this upcoming year. So having some kind of budget for that upcoming year so you can visit with your lender. And there are lots of these enterprise budgets available on, a lot of your land-grant universities. And so, for example, if you go to AgManager.info, there is some cow-calf, stocker, feedlot, et cetera, budgets available.
What is commonly one of the biggest line items when we look at expenses?
So thinking about just, looking at some of the past data here at K-State, it's almost all the time it's your feed expense. That is kind of your number one, your largest variable expense.
And so what are some things we might want to consider when it comes to reducing feed costs?
Yeah, so as I look at it, I think feed is one of those things where most budgets will show that we're somewhere between 60 to maybe 70% of our total production costs are feed, depending on how you calculate it out. And so as I look at it, some big things that I think about, when we think about the cow-calf sector being able to extend our grazing season and have more days throughout the year where those animals are out there grazing and we're not providing harvested or supplemental feedstuffs to them, that is certainly an important consideration. The timing of calving relative to forage quality and when that forage quality is at its highest level certainly has a big impact on that. And so that's something that we need to consider. But then also, too, when I think about just feed costs in general, I think about loss due to shrink or storage on feed products and commodities and hay, silages, those types of things. Doing what we can to try to minimize those costs because those can certainly add up over the course of time. Being really diligent in managing and avoiding our shrink, trying to avoid over-purchasing on items unnecessarily, really making sure we do a good job, as Dustin pointed out, budgeting, understanding what our needs are going to be to avoid over-purchasing, those types of things, I think from a feed standpoint is really, really critical.
And when we're thinking about feed and you look at KFMA data at those different operations, do you see a correlation between how much pasture and maybe non-pasture costs are?
So, yeah, KFMA, that stands for the Kansas Farm Management Association. And again, you can find all their reports and their data, summaries of data on AgManager.info. And what we have found, exactly what Jason was getting at, is those operations who are the most profitable tend to spend a little more, have higher expenses on pasture, but the non-pasture feed expenses are a lot cheaper. And so the operations who are the most profitable tend to have the smallest overall total feed costs, and it's because of the non-pasture feed expenses. And so I think what's happening is there's a trade-off between non-pasture feed and those that running cows longer or extending grazing, as Jason mentioned.
So would you say there's some value in maybe trying to line up your calving or how your herd operates so that you get the most use out of your pasture?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where certainly that looks different for every enterprise depending on how it's structured. But in general, when we can do that, when we can try to minimize our supplemental or harvested forage inputs and extend the amount of time that those animals are out there grazing and being able to add days in the calendar where we're doing that really is important. Now, we have to think about the marketing side of things and how that might change the timing of when calves are born and that sort of thing. And we're going to market those calves. Certainly, we have to consider all those things. But purely from a cost standpoint, that's a really big driver of it. And I really appreciate just the work on the KFMA data because that's really valuable for our producers. And I was looking at it here the other day in 2023, a couple of years ago, just as Dustin mentioned, just the difference in total feed costs between high and low profit producers that year was $200 a head. That's a really significant number. And when we think about that relative to maybe some other costs, looking at health as an example, health and veterinary medicine costs that same year was only $16 a head. So I think that really just demonstrates the magnitude that feed and feed inputs can really have on the profit or loss of the overall enterprise.
Can potentially using contracts be beneficial for understanding what your costs are?
Yeah, certainly when we think about purchasing, going out and buying some commodities or some inputs, I think anytime producers have the opportunity to do that, I encourage them to be able to work with their feed supplier, their commodity supplier, ingredient marketers that they might be working with. If they have the opportunity to do that, to do some forward contracting, some initial purchasing there at a price level that they know is within their budget, as we were going about talking about budgets and the importance of that, being able to set a price point for where they need to be and just being a little bit proactive about doing that. If there's opportunities for them, I think it's a great thing to do.
And you might also, if you are buying in advance, locking in with some kind of contract, you'll know your expenses, which would help on some of the earlier discussions, but you might even buy it in bulk, and that might get you a little bit more of a discount as well.
And when we're thinking about purchasing and buying things, is it really important to not buy more than what you're going to need, whether it comes in size of equipment or size of inputs?
Especially thinking just equipment for a moment since you mentioned it. I mean, if you're buying more equipment than you need, those costs aren't being spread out, and so it's kind of inefficient, and those costs on a per head basis is going to be much higher than if you weren't buying, trying to spread out those costs against the entire use of that equipment.
Any final thoughts you'd like producers to take into consideration when we're thinking about reducing costs?
I'm going to come back to the budgeting, the record keeping. So if you are keeping records and you know what your costs are, one thing I don't know that we mentioned was benchmarking. So if you go out to AgManager.info and go look at the KFMA data, you can benchmark your cost against other operations. And so you can kind of get a better feel of where maybe your operation is maybe not quite as efficient it could be. And so you can invest your time and area in those places, maybe to get your biggest bang for your buck.
One thing that I really think about that I encourage producers to keep in mind, to Dustin's point, when we think about some of those tools and those benchmarking spreadsheets and tools we have available, is so understanding our costs, but then also understanding the level of production that we need to see in order for the cow-calf enterprise to be profitable. So we can use these cow costs, if we have a good handle on what those numbers are, if we understand what our production level is, if we have a base set of cows and we can do some assumptions on the number of calves that we're going to wean every year from that cow herd, we can calculate out our break even of what we need to be able to sell those calves for in order to recoup all the costs back to be able to cover our cow expenses. And so I think approaching it with that mentality of it's understanding what our break even is to be able to be profitable, just like what we understand our break even, where we think about a break even for producing corn and soybeans, wheat acres, that sort of thing. Having the same mentality, what's our break even need to be on these calves in order to get enough money back to pay all the expenses on the cow herd. And I think just approaching it with that mentality is important.
Jason, Dustin, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
That was K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner and K-State Agricultural Economist Dustin Pendell. I will link the resources that they mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. The May K-State Garden Hour focused on heat-loving perennials for Kansas. K-State Research and Extension Central Kansas District Horticulture Agent Jason Graves discussed heat impacts, heat-proofing the landscape, and heat-tolerant perennials. According to Graves, soil health is critical to promoting resilience.
As most of you know, Kansas is a mosaic of prairie landscapes, basically transitioning from tall grass prairie in the eastern part of our state to the mixed and short grass here in the center where we are, and then you've got shorter grass prairies in the west. As we think about our own landscapes, we want to think about what makes the prairie so resilient, because these are the plants that have historically been here and survived and thrived. Resilience really is pretty remarkable in our prairie climate. And prairie environments here, like we're in, are known for intense weather fluctuations, known for droughts, for wind, for heat, and for cold. And these plants are built to endure those conditions. Obviously, there's kind of a community-based growth pattern that these plants have, where each plant is drawing moisture from different zones in the soil. The prairie ecosystem is very crowded and competitive, and these plants have found a way to thrive in this environment. Soil, though, is a key part of that ecosystem. So I want to reiterate this idea of soil health, because below the prairie, below that tall grass, mixed grass, short grass prairies, is another kind of ecosystem that gardeners, as we develop, need to become familiar with. I call this climate resilient soil. What we're trying to highlight and illustrate is all the places where microbes live in the soil. The microbial life of the soil, or the rhizobiome, is what I call the hidden helpers in the soil. These are the resident microorganisms that move in tandem with the plants and create a whole ecosystem below ground. We know that plants are recruiting microbes in our prairie soils that are helping them become more stress resilient. And really, we're just beginning to understand all the connections that exist. But what we do know is that the rhizobiome in the soil helps boost drought resistance in our plants. It creates more access to water for our plants. There are microbes that can alter hormone levels in plants. There are microbes that can activate heat proteins in our plants and just in general help our plants cope with stress. And so the healthier our soil is, obviously the more stress resilient our plants are going to be. In the root systems of our prairie plants, basically we know that those plants have recruited microbes historically. And when they're under stress, especially, those microbes are enlisted to assist with that stress. The more life we can grow in our soil, the more resilient our plants are going to be. And so we know that these microbial communities and the soil ecosystem is a big part of creating resilient, heat-tolerant plantings. So the bottom line is we need to create that ecosystem, and one of the best ways we can do that is with organic matter. The soil organic matter found in the areas that we're planting is going to be the foundation for that productive soil, positively impacting every other soil property. Specifically, the organic matter is really the food and shelter for that microbial life. And so we want to be sure we're doing practices that increase and maintain organic matter as we go about our gardening endeavors. Obviously, there's a lot of things that organic matter creates. It builds that microbial life. We get more nutrient cycling. We get soil aggregates. So we just get a much more robust plant when we increase our soil health. For gardeners, the practicality of this is the amending of soil. And so we have a lot of options, whether it's compost, shredded leaves, cover crops, a lot of ways we can improve our soils to increase that resilience. Continue to find creative ways in your gardens to build that organic matter, whether it's with the organic mulching. If it's a new planting, obviously we can work in that organic matter even before planting. But bottom line is we want to build that soil ecosystem because it is helping our plants be stress resilient.
That's K-State Research and Extension Central Kansas District Horticulture Agent Jason Graves. To watch the full presentation, search for K-State Garden Hour and click on View the Recent Webinar. The topic for the June 4th webinar is Native and Ornamental Grasses of Kansas. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.